All right. So here we are learning chapter 8. We're up to chapter 8, of the book of Tanya. What have we been talking about? What are we talking about? So here's the 6. And the discussion that we have is about spirituality. We're speaking about new spirituality. We're saying that there's no such thing as something which is neutral. We said either it's going to be holy or it's going to be unholy. That's just the way it's going to be. Either it's being used to serve Hashem or it's not being used to serve Hashem. Say, right? Either it's holy and connected to our godly soul, or it's not holy and it has to do with our animal soul, our instinctive soul, depending on how we describe it. And so last week we spoke about two levels within the unholy. We spoke about klipa, and we said that there are two levels of klipa. We said that klipa, what is klipa? Sorry, just to backtrack a drop. Klipa is the shell. Klipa is a shell. It's a husk. It's a covering over that covers over godliness. So what we see doesn't seem to be connected to holiness or to godliness. And there's this two types of shells. We said there's the semi-translucent shell, or there's the opaque shell. Right? So those are the shells. We spoke, if you remember last week, we spoke about the idea of kedusha. Kedusha, kadosh, right, means holiness. What do we do on Friday night? On Shabbos day, we make the kiddush from the word holy, because holiness we described as clear or see-through. And basically, when you look at this thing or you look at this action or the situation, you can very clearly see godliness. And that's what it is when we're talking about the kedusha. However, when we're talking about klipa, we said that there are two levels. First is we have something called klipas noiga. What's klipas noiga? Klipas noiga is translucent. Klipas noiga is a shell, but because it's not fully opaque, it allows the light to come through. And we call it mutar. We call it, right, to permit it is called mutar. What does mutar mean? It comes from the word matir asurim, untied, meaning that it's not tied down to unholiness. Currently, it might not be on the level of holiness, sort of like a cup of coffee, as we spoke about, but we are able to elevate it. And so what happens is its destiny is in our hands. And therefore, we do have access to this item, this thing that it is, right? Now, this klipas nega, this translucent shell, that's what we would in general we would think of as neutral. It's not holy, it's not unholy, it just is somewhere in between. But what happens is it's actually from this klipas nega, because what we do with it, that we can it won't stay neutral. Either it's going to go up and become holy based on using it for the right thing, or we send it down to the forces of impurity, right? Let's say we have food. I can eat food because I need the energy in order to be healthy, in order to serve Hashem. Or I can eat because I'm a glutton and I like stuff in my face. So depending on why I'm eating, it's the same action. But the reason behind it and the meaning behind it is what causes it to go either up or down. There's the story of a man, I don't remember all the details, but the idea was some big holy Hasidic master heard that there was a certain person who was on the same level of him in Gan Eden, in the Garden of Eden, back, in the world to come. And he went to go see. He wanted to see who is this special guy. And he went, and he saw that this guy was a guy. He looked at the guy. The guy woke up in the morning, and he ate a very hearty breakfast. He probably ate a dozen eggs, so he must have been really rich if he could afford that many eggs. He had his protein and his this and his that. He went to worked out for a while. Then he went and did his job, and then he came back and he did some more exercise and ate like a gazunta meal, as we say in Yiddish. Like he really ate the good food, and a lot of it. And everything else seemed to be like a regular person. And so the Hasidic master was trying to work out, like, he doesn't seem very holy. Not only isn't he just a regular guy, he's someone who's very indulgent in physicality. How does he be on the same level as me? And so he asked the guy, was talking to the guy. Basically, the guy said that there was a pogrom, and his father was killed in the pogrom because his father was weak and frail and didn't have the energy to fight back. He said, I made a decision then when I was a child. I am not going to allow them to attack Jewish people anymore. I am going to do whatever I can to be the strongest, fittest person with enough energy that I can take on a horde of intruders and be able to protect the Jewish people. And that was the answer that the Hasidic master realized. It may look like he's eating gluttonously, but the reason behind his eating was a very godly reason. So here you have somebody who's involved in the physical, but everything he was doing was specifically to elevate up to the spiritual. You can have a cell phone. You can use a cell phone to make phone calls. You can use a cell phone. You can have your Chitas and Rambam and your Siddur prayer book on your cell phone. It can be used for many good things. It could also be used for negative things. I'm not even saying, talking about doing negative things, just being on there, wasting time, etc. A lot of messaging. Once you get into messaging, then we fall into the Lashon Hara and all that area. So it's sort of what you do with it. It's what you make of it, right? If it's a mitzvah, it's for sure holy. If it's a sin, if it's an aver, it's for sure not holy. We're talking about the level that's sort of it's in the middle. What we do with it makes a difference with what's going to happen. And then we ended off the chapter by saying that what happens if we mess up and we did sin. Is we said we're able to rectify it through teshuvah. Through teshuvah, we are able to elevate things that we may have sent down to the wrong place. How do we do teshuvah? We said there are different ways to do teshuvah. It can be done through resolutions where we resolve that we are not going to do that sin again. It could be connected with teshuvah when we stock take at night and we say that when we're saying the Shema at night and we stock take, how are my actions during the day, and at that time we say, okay, I did this that was good thing. I did the negative thing. I wasn't supposed to do that. And at that time we could do teshuvah. We spoke about the highest level of teshuvah. We said teshuvah me'ava, a teshuvah that comes out of a love, that you love Hashem so much that only thing you want to do is sort of be connected and bask in His glory. And that was the teshuvah for the stuff that we have in Klippas Mega, in this translucent husk or shell, which is the level of where what we do makes a difference where it goes. But then we said that's the things that are mutar, that are allowed. Then we said there's a level of something called asur. Asur means tied up. There are things that this is not able to be elevated because it is tied up, it is bound to impurity. And therefore, since the goal of us being in this world is that we should elevate the world into the realm of holiness, if it is something that we can't elevate into the realm of holiness because it's tied down, we don't have permission to access it or use it or have anything to do with it. So what happens to that? How do we elevate those mistakes? Are we even able to elevate those mistakes? And so this week's class is going to be a little bit less on the practical side, a little bit more on the informational side, and basically is going to help us understand what happens if we mess up real bad and how could that be remedied. And this is also the last class. We're going to be discussing the workings of the soul, the energies that we have. If you remember, we said that the first 8 chapters are more informational, diagnostic, sort of when you have a manual. At the beginning, it has all the terminology. This is what we mean with this, that, and the other, or any contract, right? You have all the lists of what do we mean? What do these terms mean? Because now, once we go into it, we're going to mention terms. We're not going to discuss what they mean. So we start off by explaining these are all the terminology. This is how the soul works. These are the energies we have. These are the dynamics of how it all plays out. This is the energies that we said, the garments and the energies and the speech, thought, speech, action, all the different stuff, the different souls, is the godly soul, the animal soul. All these things are going to help us. Once we know that, we're going to speak next week and move on to the dynamics of how everything plays out in what we do, with using all this terminology that we had till now. So this is last week. We're going to explain about the soul. Now we're going to speak a little bit more, as we said, more informational. And the question is, what happens if we do the wrong thing? Let's say we eat food that we're not supposed to eat. are we able to elevate the energy? Because we just spoke about the idea. We said klipas noga is if I eat food and I use it for the energy. I use it because I want the energy in order that I should be able to have the energy to do serve Hashem, then that food I was able to elevate. Or if the food itself is a mitzvah. Eating matzah on Pesach is a mitzvah. So if I eat the matzah, it itself is a mitzvah. So when we do that, we elevate the item that we're using. But what if we eat something that we're not allowed to eat? What if we eat something that's not kosher? Can we elevate the energy? How do we elevate the energy? Can we fix the soul? Is there a hell? What's the purpose of the hell? These are the ideas, that punishment, reward. These are the things that we're going to talk about in this week's chapter to sort of wrap up this idea of what we've been speaking about till now. And then next week, we're going to get into the second stage of the book. So here's the deal. If we look at our life, we'll see that it's about how we can harmonize our actions and the world around us. And we want to harmonize our actions and the world around us together with the divine reality. Are we able to elevate the object? Are we able to help it identify with its true self? Or when we deal with this specific thing that we're dealing with, are we going to make the shell around it even thicker? And thereby we're going to be suppressing the godly identity from being able to come through and shine through and be visible. And this is the way it is with everything we do in life, whether it's our thought, our speech, our actions, our relationships, our belongings, what we eat, what we say, what we use, right? It's in everything. We decide what type of things we're going to be thinking about or talking about and what actions we're going to be involved in. And every single time that we elevate it, that's amazing. It's a great. But every time we make a descent, what happens then is we hurt our soul. We injure our soul. You could say it's sort of like soul abuse. And when we misuse the mission for which we have put on, when we do this, we misuse the mission that we're put on this earth for. Because we were placed on this earth with a mission to purify the world, to elevate the world, to make it more in touch with the divine consciousness. But when we make wrong choices and we misuse our purpose and our mission for which we, and that is a big part of tonight's class, the cleansing process that a soul needs to go through in the afterlife. What's the point of it, as we said, is to cleanse itself and to refine itself from all the misuses that happen to it in this world. But first, we're going to discuss what the Alter Rebbe starts the chapter off with. The Alter Rebbe starts off the chapter continuing what we discussed in the previous chapter, and about how we can elevate food from neutral or the translucent shell and bring it up to the level of holiness. And how is that? That is through the intention you have when you eat the food. As we said, when you eat the food with the proper intention to elevate it, then it goes up to level of holiness. And if we don't, then it goes down to we make the shell thicker and we make it not be able to, that we make that godliness is not able to shine. That's the way it is with regular food. In this chapter, however, the Alter Rebbe is going to explain that non-kosher food is different than any other sin in the Torah. And it's actually fascinating if you think about it, because you think whatever, either I'm connecting with Hashem or I'm not connecting with Hashem. I'm doing the right thing or I'm not doing the right thing. How is kosher different than all the other types of mitzvahs? Or all the other types of sin? And the reason is because eating is different than any other type of action. When I do an action, there's me, and I'm dealing with this specific item that's outside of me. Either I'm using it or abusing it, right? Or putting it to holiness or the opposite, but it's not me. What happens when I eat? When I eat, the food becomes part of my flesh and blood. Food has an effect on me that nothing else does. It's not just that I eat and I get energy like a battery. You have a battery, so the battery is separate. Yes, the battery is giving you energy, or you're plugging the computer into the wall, but it's not changing the electronic device. What happens though with food is our bodies take out all the nutrients that we need. It goes into our bloodstream. It goes through our body. It goes to every part of our body, and it actually has an effect on every part of our body. So what happens if we eat something that we're not allowed to eat? Then it doesn't matter what we do with it. it doesn't have any elevation. Even if I want, I'm having it with the intention that I want to use the energy for godliness. So even if I was not aware that it wasn't kosher, I thought it was kosher. Or even if I was eating it, I knew it was not kosher, but I'm eating it for the sake of fueling myself with energy in order that I should be able to learn Torah or be able to do mitzvahs. Or let's take a step further. Forget that I did it with the intention to have the energy. I actually used that energy to learn Torah or to do mitzvahs. If the energy came from food that I wasn't allowed to eat, all that energy stays down below. The energy of the food, the energy of the Torah and mitzvahs, everything that was involved in that all stays down below. And that's something different with food as it is than it is with every other type of mitzvah. And you could sort of look at it similar to how we view poison. If I eat poison, it has a negative effect on me. Well, what happens if I didn't know it was poison? It's not my fault. I didn't know it was poison. It's still going to have that negative effect on me. Right? So therefore, that it's similar. And let's take it a step further. Okay. I have this thing and I don't know if it's poison or not. You know I'm not going to eat it. So that's the same idea. We have this item and we're not sure if it's kosher or not. How are we going to deal with it? Are we going to eat it or not? And this is something that not everyone seems to understand. People are like, well, why are you so strict on your kosher level or stuff like that? Because if we want to keep our body, and the way it's explained in this chapter, that kosher food, or the opposite, has such an effect on our body, then I want to make sure that I'm only doing the right thing. If you think about it, if it's something that's not able to be elevated, I don't want that to be in my body. It's like a poison for my soul. But then you can ask a good question, right? Is there ever a time when I'm allowed to eat not kosher? And the answer is yes. When am I allowed to eat not kosher? In order to save a life. If I have no other food and I'm stuck on a desert island and there's a pig there, so I'm allowed to eat it. You have to kill it first, but you're allowed to eat it. So if that's the case, how could we say that it's horrible, terrible, all the time, negative, if sometimes I'm allowed to? Think about it like medicine. Chemicals are not healthy. All medicines are going to have a side effect. And every time you're going to take a medicine, you need to weigh the pros and cons and work out, is it worth having this or not? And so sometimes we make a decision. We say, it's worth it. I need it. I'm going to take this medicine anyway. But you don't start with the heavy stuff. First, you start with the light stuff. And you go step by step into, if the low medicine doesn't work, then you go with a higher one. And then you go with a higher one. So too, if we're going to have things that are not kosher, because we have to have it for saving a life, then we also want to go in that stage level. But the fact is, these chemicals are inside the body, right? A good example would be chemotherapy. If someone, God forbid, needs chemotherapy, they know that it's bad for the body. They know it's going to weaken the body and it's going to have negative stuff happening to different parts of their body, but they do it anyways because they need to. Does it affect their body? Yeah, it does. So too, even if we're using the non-kosher food in a way that it's going to help our body, the fact is it still does have an effect, a negative effect. In 1975, right, 50 years ago, the Rebbe started the 10 Mivtzoim campaign, the 10-point mitzvah campaign. And the Rebbe's basically, the idea is, we just read last week in the Torah, right? We read the 613 mitzvahs. So we have a lot of mitzvahs, 613, biblical, take the 7 rabbinic, we have 620 mitzvahs. And each of those have details and stuff. So we have 620 mitzvahs. Which mitzvah is going to be more important than the other? They're all important. But the Rebbe sort of distilled the Torah to mitzvahs that make a major impact on our times. And these are 10 mitzvahs that the Rebbe took and said, we need to push these 10. Yeah, we got to do all of them. That's the truth. But if we have to push one over another because someone's only doing one, these are the 10 that we should do. For example, 1967, the Rebbe, in 19, sorry, some of them started a bit before. 50 years ago was kosher, I believe. Before 19, 1967, the Rebbe started the tefillin campaign. And the Rebbe said everyone over the age of bar mitzvah should put on tefillin. And by putting on tefillin, you can have an effect with not just the people here around you, but you can have an effect to help the soldiers in Israel fight in order to protect the Jews in the Holy Land. I think I mentioned the story last week or 2 weeks ago about the guy by the Egypt, by the Sinai, with the film. Did I mention that? Nope. All right, I'm getting blank stares. So I know I mentioned it recently. It could have been a different time. I heard this from the guy who it happened to firsthand. Yeah, he was in Sinai, and I believe it was in 67 or 70. Oh, we had a discussion then if it was 67 or 73. I think it was 73. And he was at the Sinai, and it was with the Egyptians. And one morning, randomly, they opened up their white flags, and they said that they surrendered. So Israelis went, took them, and then said to them, why did you surrender? They said, listen, we know all these different equipment that you have, and we know how to deal with them. This morning, we saw this new fangled contraption. You were putting these black boxes on your arm, on your head, tying these wires around your arm. We had no idea what that was. And we're like, you know what? Better safe than sorry. We're going to surrender. There was a clear, perfect example where it was visible. The idea that what is done makes an effect on being able to, how tefillin is able to have an effect on the soldiers being protecting the Holy Land. The Rebbe, another one of the mitzvah campaigns was Neshek, lighting Shabbat candles. Lighting Shabbat candles brings a certain holiness into the house. And it welcomes in the Shabbat spirit. So to having Jewish books, the more Jewish books you have on your bookshelf, it changes the atmosphere inside the house. So there's 10 mitzvahs. One of those 10 of the mitzvahs that the Rebbe pushed was kosher. Why? Sorry, one second. If, as we said, what we eat becomes who we are, it has an effect on us. It has an effect on our mission on this world. So therefore, it's important that we're going to eat the right stuff. Take an athlete. The athletes who are training, there's certain foods, there's a regimen of food that they have to eat. Eat this, don't eat that. You need to have your body healthy. We do that too. We also need to keep our bodies healthy. And therefore, kosher is one of these things which have a major effect on our body. Now, because the energies of different things in this world are different, as we said, some are able to be elevated, some energies are not able to be elevated. The cravings we have for different things actually come from different parts of us. When we crave for something kosher, right? You want a really juicy steak. Or you crave for something which the Torah says you're not allowed to have. Whether it's illegal, whether it's immoral, right? There are three things. What are the three things in life that are good? If to be good in life, it's either illegal, immoral, or fattening, right? So if we can have a craving for something which is kosher, like a juicy steak, just because I'm in the mood for having some good food, or we could crave for something which we're not supposed to. These two cravings come from different places. Because naturally, we only have a desire to do what's right. The way we are born, the way our souls came into this world, the maximum we would do in straying away off the straight and narrow would be indulgence. So if we don't want to sin, if naturally we want to stay far away from sinning, how are we able to sin? And the answer is because we get desensitized. The Yetzer Hara needs to find a way to trick us. It knows that if it comes to us and say, I want you to do the wrong thing, you're not going to listen. So first it tells us, you know what? This is allowed. Indulge in something that's permitted. You know, chocolate's allowed. Have too much chocolate, if there is such a thing. There's too much chocolate. Or play a video game for an extra hour. Or even curiosity that I want to know a lot of stuff. Or things like that. Eventually, once the soul gets desensitized to discipline, then before we know it, these indulgences, they numb our souls until, God forbid, we have a desire to sin. And even within sin, we have what the Talmud calls heter d'Ravkana. That once you've done something 3 times, it doesn't bother you so much. And maybe you even start thinking that it's okay. The first time you do something wrong, you feel really, really bad about it. The second time you feel a little bit bad about it. Once you've done it the third time, you're like, it doesn't bother you as much. Or maybe even start to think that it's okay. So that is the problem, that not just, doing good things till we get to the negative. If that's the case, we should always feel bad about every time we do something wrong and stop doing it. But once we do it a few times, we sort of make it as the as how we feel that it's okay. What do they say is wrong with marijuana, right? Marijuana, in and of itself, some people say is not a bad thing. But it's a gateway drug, and therefore you have to make it illegal. Otherwise, it's a stepping stone for all the worst things. Okay, big deal. So, but it's not bad, according to them. Yeah, but because it's going to lead you to it, you want to stay away from that. And that's what the Yetzer Hara does. The Yetzer Hara comes to us to stuff which is okay, and it says, do it, do it, do it. And eventually it could be, that's the stepping stone, the indulgence in permitted things where we lose discipline. That can be the stepping stone for doing the wrong thing. You know what they say? They say, why don't you make a Shehechiyanu blessing the first time you smoke a cigarette? Elisa, what's the reason? The reason is, they say, in Israel, it's because you're too young to speak the first time you have your cigarette. They're all eating. And in America, it's because your first cigarette is in a place where you're not allowed to make a blessing. It's in that type of room. So, right, we don't want to do the wrong thing. And when we do the wrong thing, the first time, it feels really bad. But then eventually, people are doing it all over the place because there's a desensitization. The story of the Chassid al Tereb, I believe we mentioned this in the first class in the intro to Tanya, that there was a Chassid who said, I held myself back from sinning because of haughtiness, because I held myself in high esteem. They said, what do you mean? He said that every time I wanted to sin, and the Yetzer Hara came to whisper into my ear, hey, psst, you should do this, that, or the other, I said, excuse me? Do you know who you're talking to? I am a chayim to do lowly as that. And therefore, he didn't allow himself to fall into the trap to be able to stop doing the wrong thing. Sometimes we get very consumed with what we do. And this consumes us, it sort of becomes who we are. To the point, there's a story of the Baal Shem Tov. The Baal Shem Tov used to have all his Hasidim, all his Talmidim, all his students in a circle. They would put their arms over each other's shoulders. And then when he would complete the circle, they would see a vision of something that he wanted them to see. There was one time he did this, and they saw that there was an ox dressed up like a chassid, the fur hat, the long black coat, the gartel, sitting there eating a steak. And they're looking, they're like, what? They had this vision. Then he takes his hands off, the vision stops, and they're like, what did we just see? And he said, this actually is one of you people over here in this room. You're so involved in your physicality. You're so indulgent in your physical pleasures that sort of took over who you are. So up in heaven, in the world of truth, they see what you have become, which is an ox. You are the meat that you so desire. So, that's on the negative side. On the flip side, we have the story of the Alter Rebbe. What's the story of the Alter Rebbe? The Alter Rebbe had a visit from Reb Shlomo of Karlin, who was a big Hasidic master, and he came to visit. He was coming for Shabbos, and everybody wanted to have the honor of cooking for him. So the person who usually did the cooking said, "I want to do the cooking." The Rebbitzin said, "I want to be, it's a special guest. I want to do the cooking." So they had a discussion, and basically they sort of, you get to do this, you get to do that, and everyone got a job. And one person's job was nobody else was going to spice the food, and they were going to put in the salt. What happens? They have the food, everything's great. They serve the food. The Alter Rebbe starts eating. Reb Shlomo of Karlin takes one bite, and he couldn't eat anymore. And he put his fork down or his spoon down, and the Alter Rebbe said, "Well, what happened?" He said, "I can't eat it." What's wrong? It's too salty. It turns out that the person who was cooking was so used to putting in salt that she put in the salt. Then the person who was their turn to spice it, they put in the salt. And that's why it was too salty. The Alter Rebbe took another spoonful, tasted, and said, "You're right. It is too salty." What happened over there? The Alter Rebbe said that from the time of my first visit to the Magen Mizrich, I trained myself not to taste food. And therefore, he didn't taste the food. He didn't taste the extra salt. That's where he took the spiritual side, became so involved in the spiritual that he didn't notice the physical. And the Rebbe says, what lesson can we learn from this? Because every story we hear, for every story we hear, there's 100 or 1,000 stories we don't hear. So if we hear a story, obviously there's a lesson to learn from. What do we learn from this? The chances are of some of us being on such a level of the Alter Rebbe is pretty slim. But sometimes, the Rebbe says, we should be too engrossed in our Torah learning or too involved in focusing on our ungodliness that we don't notice the physical pleasures of life. Similar to, you have the absent-minded professor. He doesn't notice what's going on the physical level. Sometimes that's good for us. Sometimes we also shouldn't notice the physical pleasures. So because of this, and we said that sometimes we might do the wrong thing, then our soul needs a cleansing in the afterlife. But to clarify, okay, there's the story of the Rebbe Rashab. A guy came to the Rebbe Rashab, and he was complaining, "I have this problem, I have that problem, my life is in ruins, it's horrible, it's terrible." And the Rebbe Rashab said, "I'm sorry, I can't help you." The guy almost fainted. He came to a Rebbe. He's supposed to be getting help, and you can't help me. He went outside, and he just started crying. And he's sitting there crying, weeping bitterly. When the Rebbe Rashab's brother, the Razah, comes to him and says, "Why are you crying?" So he told him what happened. The Razah went to the Rebbe Rashab and said, "I don't understand. You can't help him. He's sitting out there. He's crying. He's broken." So the Rebbe Rashab said, "Send him back in." The guy came back in, and the Rebbe Rashab gave him a blessing. Hang on a moment. What happened over here? Either he could bless him or he couldn't bless him. He could help him or he couldn't help him. At the beginning, he says, "Oh, I can't help you. Oh, my brother told me I should help you. Now I can help you." And Rebbe's not like that. He doesn't push you away and then due to pressure, I had no choice. That's not the way it works. The Rebbe explains the story and says that blessings are like rain. We could have a rain, but if you don't plow and plant, nothing's going to grow with the rain. This person was at a situation where the blessings would have just rolled off his back. The blessings would not have had a way to take hold. But the tears and the brokenheartedness brought him to a point of acceptance that now he was a vessel to receive the blessing. So too, so to speak, when we speak about punishment in the afterlife, it's not really a punishment. It's actually a cleansing process. Just like the Rebbe Rashab's statement, when he said, "I can't help you," it wasn't a punishment. It was the first stage of healing. And sometimes healing begins with pain, right? Why wouldn't you want me to punch you in the face? Because it hurts. But you'd pay a doctor thousands of dollars to do a surgery, which has a painful healing process. So what's the difference? The difference is an awareness. Nobody wants useless pain. But if I know that this pain will get me somewhere, I'm going to do it. So the awareness is the difference. Hell is useless to the soul if it's not aware. But if the soul is aware of the cleansing that's going on and that it's going through, and the experiences and godly connection that the soul will have afterwards, the soul is ready for it, so it's able to have a better future. So even though we speak about hell as a punishment, so to speak, that's just a term that's used for something that's not pleasant. Modern day educators, we would call it hell. It's a consequence, not a punishment. Right? What's a good politician? Good politician is someone who can tell you go to hell in a way that you look forward to going. Or the other one, they say, this girl goes on a date and she comes back and she tells her mother he's a really nice guy, but I have a problem. He doesn't believe in heaven and hell. What do we, if he doesn't believe in the core tenets, what do we do? Her mother says, don't worry. Between you and me, we'll make him a believer. So rather than a punishment, it's really a means to an end in order to allow the soul to be as it should be, free to communicate with Hashem and have that close connection. And this healing process has different stages in order to bring it back to par, back to the level it was before it came into this world. And so Kabbalah mentions a couple of stages that the soul needs to travel through in its journey to its ultimate place. In Hayom Yom, it mentions, the Rebbe brings down that the way to avoid these, right? You may remember it as the hollow of the sling, right? Is by learning Mishnayos, Tanya, and Tehillim off by heart and reciting it, these holy words as we're traveling. This can help us avoid the stuff that we're about to say. The first thing is called Chibut HaKever. Chibut HaKever is, the basic idea is, every soul needs to communicate. Before the soul comes down, it communicates with Hashem. Once the soul is inside a body, now it communicates through the body, through the mitzvahs that the soul does, through the Torah that it learns. And these are things that the soul uses to communicate in its lifetime. However, what happens once the soul passes away? When the soul passes away, now it needs to go back to the former form of communication. But as long as the soul is connected to the body, it has a hard time communicating because it can't communicate with the body anymore because the body's not alive. It can't have that same spiritual communication that it had before because it's still connected to the body. So it's sort of in a limbo. And sometimes the soul is kept in the body a little bit longer in order to help it recognize the mode of communication. So that would be Chibut HaKever. Kaf HaKela would be like Throwback Thursday. The soul is, so to speak, thrown back to experiences it had during its lifetime, so it can get rid of them. Modern therapy, psychotherapy, helps us understand this very clearly and easily. Because what is the best way to heal a trauma? You need to go back and you need to relive that situation. What do you do if you fall off a horse? Get back on. Fall off a bike, get back on. My brother Shalom from Simcha Monica, some of you know him. So years ago, we're talking about close to 30 years ago. He was in Moscow and he was in the Red Square, and a bunch of Russian thugs came up and started beating him and his friends up. And they broke his arm. He had to get a pin put in, and they injured him. Anyways, they had to go back through. There was a trial to prosecute the thugs and stuff like that, and he didn't want to go back. And the first thing they told him is, you have to go back even before the trial is taking place. You need to go back, because if you don't go back, you'll never be able to go back again. Because then once trauma kicks in, it'll be too late. And that's what he did. And he said that what helped him able later to be able to go back is because straight away after that he went back. So the same thing is with the soul. The soul needs to go back to the time of the trauma, the time when the soul was damaged, and through that, it can rid itself of the issue of the problem. Now, these two things of kaf hakel and chibud hakever are for things that we were allowed to do, but we didn't do them properly. And just by the way, to clarify, we're not talking about messed up souls, right? You can have successful people who go to therapy in order to fix traumas from years earlier. And so to these souls could have been great souls in their life for the most part, but they still have a certain fixing that they need to do. Um, there's a story of the guy, I'll say it in short, there was a man who couldn't make it in life. He had a problem with financial problems. Everything he tried, he didn't succeed. So he said, I'm going to go on a boat. I'm going to go to a faraway land. He heard that there's a land where the streets are paved with gold. And he said, I'm going to go there. He goes up to this faraway land. He gets off the boat and he looks on the seashore. And instead of just seeing sand, there's gold, there's diamonds, there's precious jewels. And he picks them up and he starts stuffing his pockets with them. He stuffs up stuffs his suitcase with them. And he goes, like, that's great. He goes to a hotel. He says, hey, I want the penthouse suite. And give it. And they're like, can you pay for it? And he's like, sure, no problem. He pulls out a diamond. He says, here's a diamond. Keep the change. They're like, what is this stone for? He's like, a stone? What do you mean? And they're like, yeah, this is not useful currency over here. He's like, oh. They're like, mm-hmm. Over here, we use chicken fat. We use schmaltz. That's the currency here. So he didn't have anything. They said, we'll give you some room if you're going to start. Will you start washing dishes in the kitchen? And that's how you pay for your room. He said, okay. So he puts his stuff down and he starts, gets a little bit of schmaltz and then he starts more. And then he opens a chicken farm and then he keeps going and going and he amasses a great wealth. After a couple of years, he says it's time to go back home. He hires a boat or two or three, and he fills it with as much chicken schmaltz as he can. And he gets onto the boat and he's traveling home. Before he got there, he sent a message, I'm on my way home. He comes and he's pulling up towards the dock, and his family's there waiting for him. And they see him, and the problem is that as he's getting close, there's a stench that the people are smelling. And the stench is getting worse and worse, and he comes off the boat, and they're there. He's like, oh, look what I brought. And they're like, what did you bring? Look at this, the wealth. They say, what wealth? He says, I have boats full of chicken schmaltz. They're like, ooh, that's what we're smelling. He's like, yeah, but we're rich. They're like, no. Everybody has chicken schmaltz. It's not worth anything. You need money, you need diamonds, you need jewels. And he feels so bad. It's like, oh my goodness, this was horrible. Look what I did. And so he looks, he found his original pair of pants, found a couple of diamonds that he stuck in there, and he found a couple of things here and there that, in the cracks of the suitcase. But he realized if only he would have gone down there and focused on his mission, everything would have been good. So too, we're born, and Neshama comes into this world. It sees all the gems and the precious stones and the jewels, all the opportunities to do mitzvahs. But then it sees all the physical stuff. And it forgets about the proper reason for stuff. And it starts looking at all these other stuff, the schmaltz of the world. And then, eventually, the soul passes away. He comes up to heaven and he's like, look what I did. And they're like, but where's the real stuff? So the shame that we have from this realization, that's what we'd call Gehenna. That's what we'd call hell. That is a cleansing of the soul. The soul is for stains that, when the soul has deeper stains, it needs a deeper cleansing. And that's what people call Gehenna or hell. And interestingly, there's actually two types. There's a hot hell and a cold hell. For sins of commission, sins of omission, things that we were supposed to do that we didn't do, or things that we weren't supposed to do when we did do. Things that were done with a passion, versus things that we did with coldness and apathy, and we didn't do what we were supposed to. Those will be whether it's going to be the hot hell or the cold hell. Now, the yard site, interestingly, right? We say that on a yard site, the salt goes higher and higher. And every time we do a mitzvah for somebody who passed away, it elevates them. That's not a cleansing process. That's just in order to have a stronger connection to godliness. So what we say over here is that the stages in the cleansing process will remove the issues that we created by our misuse of the soul. And therefore, Gehenna is only a temporary stage. It's Kaddish we only say for 11 months. It says that the biggest sinner only is in Gehenna for 12 months. What is it for? It's sort of like when you're returning your rental. You got to clean it up before you give it back. That's what Gehenna is, just cleaning up, removing any stains that there is. And so these are the different levels of the stuff that of the Gehenna punishment, so to speak. The sins that we've been speaking about up until now, these are all sins that are dealing with the emotional level. But there's actually something that can affect us on a deeper level. And the same way with action, we have the two types of klippa, two types of the shell. There's klippas noiga, the translucent shell, or the shell klippas atameus, which is the opaque shell. So too we have it in the intellectual. If the learning is not about Torah or mitzvahs or God, what type of clip or what type of shell is it? So ideas are like glasses, right? We look through glasses. Whatever the tint is of the glasses, that's your perspective of the entire world. And therefore, we need to ensure that the tint that we have on our glasses is the proper tint in order that we're looking at the world in the proper way, the way Hashem wants us to. It says when Jacob was on his way to go to his uncle Lavan, he surrounded his head with stone to protect him from what? The animals could eat anything. The idea was, he said, I'm going to a place which is known for immorality, known for being tricking and stealing and lying and cheating. I don't want my head to get affected by that. So this was sort of a physical thing he did to make a statement. I want to make sure my head stays clear. When the Greeks defiled the temple, right? The story of Hanukkah and the Beis Hamikdash, what did they do? They pulled off the seal of the oil. If they didn't want them to light the menorah, pour out the oil. They didn't care about lighting the menorah. They wanted to make it impure. Oil rises to the top. Oil represents intellect, which is higher than our emotions and our feelings. What did they want? They wanted us to forget that the Torah that we're doing is Hashem's Torah. So they ripped off the seals to make it impure, to show intellect can be tainted. Follow the Greek philosophies, everything will be great. That's what they wanted to do in time of Hanukkah, and that's what Maccabees were fighting against. So, till now we spoke about the action mitzvahs, but now the end of the the end of the chapter, chapter 8, the Alter Rebbe speaks about the concept of intellect. That we need to make sure that what we learn is going to be appropriate and is going to be from the klippas noiga, not from the shalish klippas atameus, from the opaque. The opaque would be certain things that we're not allowed to learn. Things like Avodah Zarah. We're not allowed to learn about idol worship. We don't do comparative religions because it's not learning in a way which is going to help me have the proper color lens in order to see the world in the godly way. There were some people who needed to. For example, the Sanhedrin needed to know what's considered idol worship and what's not. So they needed to go and study that. But they were using it for the service of Hashem. Most other types of sciences and math and intellectual knowledges or physical knowledge and stuff, a lot of that would be klippas noiga. If you're becoming a scientist because you want to cure diseases, or you want to be an inventor, or you want to prove how there is no rift or struggle between Torah and science, it's great. But if you're becoming a scientist in order to try and say look, I want to prove that there's a problem with believing in Hashem, or whatever you want to learn to do that, then that's a problem. So there are some intellects that we're not supposed to do, some that we are allowed. Rav went to live on a farm for 18 months. The big Talmudic sage Rav went to live on a farm for 18 months because he wanted to know properly what are the halachas, how does it work, what the laws are better, and be able to say this is the halacha, this is not the halacha, based on physical knowledge, first-hand knowledge of how things work. So that's what the Alter Rebbe ends off the chapter with, speaking about the idea of the intellectual stuff that we the holy, the Torah, and he looks at the guy, the chassid looks at the books and sees that they're full of heresy. So he says to the guy, "What are you selling this stuff for?" And he says, "What do you? I don't believe it, but it's my job. What do you want? I got to make a living somehow." So he said, "Listen, destroy these books, and I have a job for you." The guy said, "Okay." He said, the priest at the local church needs somebody to ring the bells, so you can go and take that job. And he turns to the chassid and said, "Are you crazy? I'm Jewish. You expect me to go and ring the bells?" And he says, "Then what's the difference, whether it's the physical action or the intellectual action?" So we always want to be careful with people like, well, are you closed-minded in the stuff that you're learning? Is it considered closed-minded, or is it considered focusing on what's really important? So these 8 chapters that we've learned up until now, this ends the 8th chapter. We spoke about terminology, we spoke about general ideas about our makeup, and starting next week, we're going to move on to start speaking about the battle that we have, the struggle between our two souls, etc. And that is the end of chapter 8.
Mashiach.